Who's not been affected by their parents? So you've all been children, and you've always been all been affected by parents. And unfortunately today, I'm going to have to touch on a number of points, and I'm not targeting anyone. I'm working on the assumption this morning that there are orphanages. Do you agree with me? There are orphanages. There are other orphanages as well, by the way. We cause orphans sometimes by divorce. So that's also a type of orphanage. We have divorce, which is a part of life. It happens and it's all over. We have cohabitation, it happens all over. We have the marriage, and we have marital breakdown. It's all part and parcel of this. And what I'm bringing to you this morning is, I'm not targeting one person, I'm targeting the child and the mind of the child. I want to speak to you about the mind of the child this morning. It is extremely important that you understand the mind of the child. Because the mind of the child created you, and children are created by parents. The whole life's organ and everything that happens around children happens there. So Mark 10 verse 13, some people brought children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples scolded the people because they thought the children weren't important. I'm adding that myself. When Jesus noticed this, he was angry and said to his disciples, "Let the children come unto me, and do not stop them, because the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I assure you that whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child will never enter it." And then he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on each of them, and blessed them. So Jesus pulled out of his very busy cycle, and he said, let's give attention to the children, because the children need it. And it's important. And I want to bring you that there. So Jean Piaget in the 1800s, and those who studied child psychology will understand, or child education will also understand the theory that I'm going to bring you this morning. But he brought out and he said that there's 4 stages of life, and especially for children, four stages. And the first stage is the sensory motor stage, and that's from birth to 2 years old. What happens? The child is born, and as the child is born, you carry the child, isn't it? You carry the child. Then afterwards, the child becomes very mobile, and you can't handle the child anymore. And then the child starts climbing off and crawling, and then the child learns to walk, all in the first 2 years, isn't it? And then they start saying these little words to understand life, and they start picking up their surroundings, and they start adapting. Come on, you've been there. Okay, so that's the sensory motor stage, where the sensory motor mechanisms of the brain and the body start working together, and they get the child mobile. Then we go to the next stage, is the pre-operational stage, where children actually learn to operate. They learn to operate, and everything around them is a learning phase, and they learn to operate as human beings. Okay, so you've been there. Now, in this pre-operational phase, a child starts remembering. So in other words, I said to you, I had that example the other day. I said, who can remember anything before they were 3 years old? And possibly you can't. You might have a glimpse of something that happened, but you cannot really remember anything at the 3-year age. But after the 3-year age, in this pre-operational age, up to 6 years of age, you start remembering, and the mind is allocated a block of memory where you can really think about these things. And that's why the communists said, if you can give us a child to the age of 7, you can have him after that. Why? Because in this period, the pre-operational phase, 2 to 6 years old, is extremely important, because it's the learning phase of the child, and it forms the basis of the brain and the thinking and the emotion and everything. Even emotional intelligence is brought into this area at this stage. Now, you ask why I bring all these psychological theories, because I believe that God created us as good human beings, and God put us in this place, and also science proves that. But I've got to bring this to you this morning so that you can understand what you do to a child up to the age of 7, that child will remember it, and it will form the child to a certain extent. There's a forming area of the child that happens in that pre-operational stage. Now, bring you other stages as well. In the concrete operational stage, 7 to 11. So 7 to 11, they start concretizing their methods. They know what they're doing, and they know why they're going to do that, and they're going to move, and they understand that they're human beings. They understand what they're doing, and then you'll find them fiddling with a fire extinguisher in that time, and not being naughty. We'll call that naughty, and we'll probably smack them, but they're actually experimenting. They're pulling things apart, and they'll take the fire extinguisher, and you're not supposed to do that. We know it's illegal to do that, but the child is only experimenting. It's not really naughty, but it becomes naughty, and they feel guilty about it because they know they weren't supposed to do that. And I'll bring to you that in Erikson's phases, I'll bring that to you and I'll explain that to you. So in this experimental stage, up to 12 years old, the child actually develops a method of understanding the world, and all they want to do is they want to understand what life is about. They seek to understand, and we can help them to understand. But in all of that seeking, in that stage, you can hurt that child, or you can build that child. And now, you may be a product of one of these stages. You may be a product of hurt. In one of these stages, you may have got hurt, and that affects you today. You know that? That affects you today. Difficult to think about these things, but that's how it works. And our children are products of what we do. You hear what I'm saying? Our children are products of what we do or we have done. Then you get to the formal operational stage, teens, over 12. They also do silly things, but they know everything. That's the difference. They do silly things, but they actually know it all. You can't teach them anything. That's where children are when they get to the teens. And these are the 4 stages that I just want to bring to you now. What I'm saying is, in the pre-operational and the sensory motor stages, there's little or no memory into the future. But from 7 years old to the teens, that child remembers everything. The memory block is gone. Everything is remembered. Yes? And then that forms the basis of how the successful or not successful the child will be. So I'm going to married families this morning. First, I'm going to stop at married families. And in married families, they're not always healthy either. Let's not go to divorced families. Let's go to married families first. They're not all healthy either. And I've said that before. Who doesn't argue in a marriage? And nobody seems to put up their hands, so they all do all. It happens. But the verbal abuse can often leave more problems in a child. And now I'm going to say this. There could be verbal abuse between mom and dad. Between mom and dad, there can be verbal abuse. And the child cringes and sits and listens to this and says, can't you stop this? Can't you stop this? So what's happening now? Mom and dad are smacking one another in verbal abuse. And who actually gets slapped? This little one that's in fear and doesn't know, doesn't want to be here. This is not what I want. And that child remembers it. Remembers that. Exactly that. We've got no children sitting here today, and we've got more teens and that. You'll understand these things, and your young adults. You need to take what I'm saying today, because your children will be the products of your actions. Do you hear what I'm saying? And you are the product of your parents' actions. Physical abuse, even worse. Mom eats dad or dad eats mom. What does the child do? Gets slapped psychologically in a big way. Because the child loves mom and the child loves dad. I've spoken to arguments because arguments bring verbal abuse. I want to speak to good argumenting. Good argumenting is focused and it's away from the children. You don't have to have an argument in front of the children. You both have the choice to say, we're not going to argue here, let's go to the bedroom. You can close the door. You can have your argument, you don't have to shout either. You see, we need to fix these things because our children are touched by what we do. Never threaten to commit suicide in front of your child. I'm saying that straight out today. I'm going to in there. I'm not mincing my words. Don't threaten to leave your wife or your husband in front of the children. Don't threaten to commit suicide. Don't threaten to kill the other one with a knife and those things. You don't do that in front of children. That's the worst horror movie you can show a kid. It's the worst horror movie you can show a kid. And you that listening on the radio today as well, you know this, that you never threaten the other part in your marriage with something dramatic in front of your child. You never do that. You don't. You see, all of this minces into the future of our children. Then I'm going to get to the next. It's funny that Jesus first takes the children and blesses them and then speaks about divorce. Right? Jesus takes the children, blesses them, and just after that he speaks about divorce. He contradicts Moses. Moses' law says that a man can go and he can give his wife a release letter and send her away. That's primitive divorce. So he releases his wife by means of a letter of the priest, and he says, go. What do? We go to the judge releases us and says, okay, you go your way, you go that way. Same thing. It's Moses' law, just modernized. It's all happened. But this is what Jesus says. And for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and unite with his wife. And the two will become one, so that they're no longer two, but one. No human being must separate them. What God has joined together. When they went back into the house, the disciples asked Jesus about the matter, and he said to them, a man who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against his wife. In the same way, a woman who divorces her husband and marries another man commits adultery. For which Jesus also died on the cross, by the way. For that, Jesus also died on the cross. And he's given us the freedom. Not the freedom to come and go, but he's also given us the freedom of the sin that we committed. And he's forgiven that. Forgiveness. This is spiritual healing. Remember, that's what I'm speaking about. But I'm going to move to the pain of divorce this morning. The pain of divorce is not just between man and wife, or husband and wife. The pain of divorce is a pebble that falls in the water, and it goes out far, far, far reaching, further than that. It affects mom. It affects the children. Why I'm putting mom and dad there is because the children are in the middle. It affects mom, children, dad. Dad, children, mom. It affects all three. directly. Not indirectly, directly. It's got a direct impact. It's got an indirect impact on grandparents and directly, and on friends, and on extended family. It is just like that, my brother and sister, that you will always have that and you will always live with it. So what I ask in many cases is, if you're battling with all of these aspects, it's still about the children. And we need to find some common ground as far as the children are concerned, because this is where children need healing. If you were a product of a divorce as a child and you're an adult, I almost said you're a human being, you're an adult today, but you're a product of divorce, you need healing as well. Why? Because I've got feeling against my mom, and I've got feeling against my dad, and I had to make compromises as a child. I had to compromise myself for one and then for the other. It's tough stuff I'm speaking about this morning, but while the child that has been through a divorce case needs healing as well, not only the parents. You know, the parents, they go for psychological healing and they go and see psychologists and they go and see pastors and they do all of these things. But the child is often left at their own peril. The child is often left just floating there, and the child often just has to make up his or her mind what they're going to do about life, because they don't have the direction of the parents anymore. So what can we do? If we are one of those that are hurt by divorce, we need to forgive. But we need to reclaim the direction that we have emotionally, materially, intellectually, and physiologically. All affect the child that has been through a divorce case. Each of them have been affected by it. So let's go to, I just want to page to Erikson. Now, Erikson was also a psychologist, and he also worked on child psychology, but he took the whole cycle of life and he brought it through to the top. So I'm going back to the infant. The infant, 0 to 18 months, there's a trust versus mistrust. So the infant trusts where they get comfort from, where they get food from, where they get warmth from. That's the infantile trust that's there. The infant has a created being that develops on trust and trusts the people around it. Have you seen a baby trusts the mom, trusts the dad, but will not go to a stranger? Have you seen that? Most babies will not go to a stranger. Why? Because there is no developed trust. Already the instinct says, I don't trust you. Until I trust you, you won't touch me. That's before 18 months. That child has the instinct to say, I don't trust you, you won't touch me. Come on, you've seen that? The trust must develop first in a child at that stage. Then the anatomy versus the shame and the doubt. Now, you see the children between 2 and 3, they've got no problem to go to the toilet, and they talk about the toilet, and they talk about their anatomy, and they talk about, and we don't have that problem. We can't do that. Or shall I say, we do have that problem. We can talk about all those things. But to a child, it's a natural phase they go through. And then they get taught the shame part of it. And then suddenly you'd find one day the child says, close the door and I go to the toilet. Why? Because the shame kicks in. And then they start looking after themselves. They know what is right and what is wrong. Those little things start kicking in. Interesting thing about life. This is what Erikson put out. Then between 4 and 5, it starts. to look at initiative versus guilt. And I'll tell you about the fire extinguisher. So I had this little thing as well, and it was a little bit older than this. I'll tell you a story now, but the industry side of this. So 6 to 11 is the industry versus inferiority. So now you start competing. So there's a bit of a competition about what my labels on my clothes are versus what the labels on the other children's clothes are. What's in my lunchbox versus what's in the other one's lunchbox. And the inferiority area kicks in over here. So just then, before I get to identity versus confusion, because I can remember something in my life on this one is, who was that girl who had the anthill? It was in history, the anthill with the Rachel de Beer. Rachel de Beer. Okay, so Rachel de Beer was a girl that was cold, and she took her brother, and they got into an anthill, and she looked after her brother in the anthill and guarded him from the cold. Okay, so this is the story. So I was very interested in this anthill because the teacher at school explained that this anthill was actually the oven. They made an oven in the anthill. And so I went to the farm, my grandmom's farm, and my dad and them were looking after the farm. So I've got to tell you the story to give you the picture. And I went to the barn where all the grass is, and I took a lot of grass and with my sister, and I said, we're going to build an anthill. So we built an anthill. Then we fetched newspaper because we're going to make the oven, and we hollowed out the grass, the anthill, and put newspaper in. And then we went to the coal stove where the matches were, and we took the matches. I can't remember what the lady was, the helper was, her name, I can't remember, but we sneaked out with the matches. So now we're going to do the anthill thing. Well, I've never had a hiding like that in my life before, but that's the first good hiding I had, and I'll never forget it. So again, I took the match and I lit it, and I put it down, and I said to Gail, my sister, elder sister, I said to her, okay, now we're going to make this. And she says, yes, do it. And I lit it, and I dropped it on the ground, and I said, no, maybe we shouldn't. And I tried to put out the fire, and I couldn't. And the fire took down the whole farm in a couple of hours. The farm was burnt down, except the house. The house was still okay and everything there. As I said, the hiding I will never forget. And saying sorry to my grandparents, I'll never forget either, because they were on holiday. But this was in the 6 to 11 stage where children experiment and they do things. Not because they actually naughty, but because they're inquisitive. But it's a big thing, isn't it? So these things happen. Then you get to identity versus confusion, and that's the teenage where I'm confused about life, and then I want to identify with this, then I want to identify with that, and all these things happen. You get to intimacy versus isolation between 16 and 25. Then you get to the generation of wealth, 25 plus, and then you get to integrity versus despair at our age, over 50s. Then you start thinking what's good and what's bad and what should have been and what shouldn't have been. So those are all the things that happen in life. But if you look at this one side, you've got growing up, and the other side, maturity. Why am I bringing you this? Because if your child has hurt and you're dealing with a child with psychological hurt, you need to understand in what stage that child got hurt. Why? Because that's important. You see, when we analyze the situations, we need to understand in what age the child got hurt, so that you can see what part of the mind was affected and what the product is of that effect, and the cause and effect analysis you can then do. So this is how it'll work for forgiveness as well. So you need to understand where the child must forgive and where the child must be healed. Okay, so I'm also going back to a problem that you have now, and we have that in the church as well. We have the two-home syndrome. The two-home syndrome. So what we've got is the children come to dad for these weekends, and they're with mom in the weeks. Okay? In mom's house, they have these rules. Come on. In mom's house, they have these rules, and in dad's house, they have those rules. And the two sets of rules don't always comply, but they cause confusion, because at mom's house, I can do these things. At dad's house, I can't. At dad's house, I can do these things. At mom's house, I can't. Those are the two taboo things. So this is the two-home syndrome. We've got this at church as well. So the child comes to Sunday school, comes to children's church, and then the next week he's not there. The week after he comes to children's church again, they say, "But why weren't you here last week?" The child doesn't want to say, "It's because I'm with my dad, because my dad's important to me." And so the child doesn't know what to say. Then what does the child do? He says, "I don't want to go to Sunday school anymore." Because of the hurting questions that get asked. We need to understand these things. This is what life's about, and this is the situation we have. Whether we've created it, we haven't created it, the church needs to come to terms with what the reality is. And I'm bringing you the reality this morning, and we need to work on these things. You see, the problem with the both rule household as well is that afterwards the child decides, you know what? At this house I can do this. Because remember, the intellect of the child is extremely clever, especially when they're teenagers. They know exactly how to wangle to get what they want. And then they decide in their minds, no rules at all. So you've got mom's rules, dad's rules, my way, and no rules. And then that becomes a product going forward, for which that child also needs healing for. This church, the church, has a big job to do, because we need to supply a safe haven for all children, for all households. So, getting to the end of my sermon this morning, I always get to the how-to. What are we going to do about this? I'll bring you the problem, but we've got to get to solutions. The first thing is, have a look at the cycle. And you can have a look, I'll put this on YouTube as well, you can have a look there. Have a look at which cycle you or another child got hurt. In which part of the family cycle you got hurt. That's probably what you have to pay attention to. Have a look at which stage you are in now. You might be an adult, or the child may be a teen but got hurt in a very early age of life. And it causes confusion in the teenage sphere. You understand what I'm saying? These are the things you have to look at when you are looking at spiritual healing for a child. A child also needs spiritual healing. They also go through the same things we as grown-ups go through. We need to give the children the forgiveness principle, and they need to understand that if I hurt them as a parent, they need to forgive me for that as well. You think that's not necessary? I think it is. Sometimes you're going to have to say to your children, listen, I know I'm not perfect. Please forgive me for that. Even just that already puts the child at ease. That you know that you may have wronged them in some way or another. And that they forgive you for that. Because that brings unity. We've got to bring family unity back, where we start linking the family back to our family values, even though we might be broken. Even though there may be hurt. We can filter down that hurt and bring it down to null if we really want to. We have to do that. We need to get to a point of understanding as well, and sometimes that'll be a sit down where you got to understand where you as parent may have gone wrong. And I think that's very difficult too, because parents don't normally want to know where they went wrong. They want to see the success of their children. But many times, your children will be successful if they can understand your thinking and you can understand theirs. And that may, as I said, mean you need to sit down and regain the trust of the child to get back to that point. Last but not least, the child wants to feel protected. Even though you may have let the child down, the child still wants and still maintains that you will protect him or her. And the child wants to feel that. So putting that protection in place is good for the kid and it's good for you. And I'm closing. I hope it hasn't been too hard a sermon on you, on us. We're all in the same boat here. Isaiah 33 verse 2 says, Lord, have mercy on us. We have put our hope in you. Protect us day by day and save us in times of trouble. I think that's the family motto. Lord, we've put our trust in you.